There it is. It is now official. So, okay. Welcome everybody. My name is Frances. Most of you know me. We got a few more people here. I am the moderator of the Tuesday Night Book Club. Before I go into details, a few more people. I'm just going to show you how we will roll tonight. So what the map of the night is going to be. So let me do that briefly. I'm going to share something with you. So this is how we will roll. We're done with a Zoom practice now, so it'll be about 15 minutes, hopefully less than that, of me talking about housekeeping stuff, announcements, and a brief introduction of our guests. And then Mr. Abdul Rashid, who is our guest speaker, will talk first, after which my coworker, Natalie Gemiola, will have kind of a nice banter conversation with him. And then at 8 o'clock, it will be all of our turns. So this is a discussion. I want all of you to bring yourselves to the table, and let's share our insights, our opinions with each other. In the meantime, okay. Thank you, Natalie, for letting everybody in, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is our agenda. By the way, we will do ratings at the end of this. We rate books from 0 to 5, although we've also had negative ratings. The lowest negative was -80. So, but that was that was a one-time one. We're not going to go there. So let's be positive. Right, 5. Hi. Oh my goodness. Hi everybody. It's good to see everyone. And we encourage decimal points. So, you know, 5 is the highest. 3.4.1 is good. Now, just for our Zoom checklist, I want to make sure that we're all on board. If possible, please plug in your devices, because we've noticed that if you are unplugged, you lose power pretty quickly on Zoom, and we may lose you, so we don't want to lose you. So if you could, that would be wonderful. Wonderful, plug yourselves in. And just to let you know, if other members in your household are using the internet, it might also affect your connection to Zoom. So just throwing it out there. And does everybody see us in gallery view, or do you guys see everybody's faces? Are you pretty good with that? Yeah, all good? Okay, thank you. All right. And again, just to let everybody know, especially the ones who-
I'm good.
You're good? Good. Everybody who came in a little later, this portion of the talk, it will be recorded. And as soon as Abdul and Natalie are done with their conversation, we will stop recording and we can be ourselves. Not that Abdul and Natalie are not themselves, but you know what I mean. Okay, so welcome to everybody. This book club has been meeting since 2002 for the second Tuesday of every month. But when the pandemic hit, we did not miss a session. So we've been doing this consistently since the pandemic. This is our 7th Zoom meeting. So we have Zoom veterans in the Zoom room. Our first and only graphic novel that this book club read was Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and that was early 2000, I believe. That was also a memoir. So comic books have come a long way since then, and as you know, today graphic novels like March Book 1 is required reading in universities and schools. So it used to be just in newspapers or dime stores, and now they're everywhere. They've come from low culture to now high culture. This book club is also special today because it is part of the One Community Reads Racial Equity in America program. A lot of events are happening now all the way through December 2020. The 9 library systems in Cuyahoga County, along with partners like the City Club of Cleveland, have curated a series of online events with writers, speakers, and activists to help all of us learn about racial justice issues from a variety of sources. So Mr. Rashid is one of those speakers. Attendees are encouraged to deepen their participation and educational experience by engaging in virtual dialogue through an online community platform located on the One Community Reads website. So if you guys want to try to visit there, it's onecommunityreads.org. So please visit and share your thoughts. So to all our first-time participants, thank you for being here. I see you guys, you know, especially during these difficult times when we're all in our Zoom rooms. This is one way to connect with each other. Thank you for being this part of this community of readers and listeners. And as you guys know, Representative John Lewis, speaking in different, at different times, said, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America." And you guys, this is what we're doing today. This may not be a grand gesture, but it starts with dialogue, and that's what we're doing exactly. We're getting into good trouble. Natalie, let me introduce Natalie first. Natalie Gemiola is a full-time associate with our Adult Services Department. She is the head of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and she will be interviewing our guest speaker, Abdul Rashid. Mr. Rashid is a local illustrator and creator. He is a native of Flint, Michigan. He was a student of the Interlochen Arts Camp. He got his BA from the College of Worcester and his MBA from the University of Phoenix. He is the CEO and founder of AHR Visions, LLC, a transmedia pop culture studio. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there, but his work has been featured in a number of independent publications as well as Marvel distributed series. And he is based in Northeast Ohio. So without further ado, Mr. Rashid, I'll give you the mic and have you talk to us about your experiences as a comic book creator, as well as your particular experience with this book, March Book One. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you again for this opportunity. I really appreciate the platform. Let me see, first things first, I guess. As was touched on, being a creator of color, which is kind of like the mantra that many Black creators actually utilize, and creators from other different demographics. I identified, you know, for a period of time as just a freelance artist, wanting the opportunity to storytell. Being a student of Interlochen, when I was 16, that's when I had my first art show when I was 16, actually. Which actually caught the eye of a couple of the Women's Foundation of Michigan. And they were actually the ones that actually paid for my 2 years at the camp at Interlochen, by seeing my portfolio, seeing my show, and pretty much funded me behind that way. So I was actually very humbled and flattered by that, because they saw something that at that point in time I just looked upon as like just, I thought everybody could do, quite honestly. At that point, I enjoyed fine art presentation, fine art development, and one of the things that I wanted to do was really emphasize the concept of storytelling, and through pieces, through my art, and of course find ways where I could touch on the Black experience in the United States, and through a method or through a medium that you know, everyone could appreciate and really spark some level of thought, and in hopes actually like resonating some level of an epiphany and saying that, okay, I see this a little bit more, and maybe have conversations that were the uncomfortable conversations that needed to be had, particularly even back then. My father, of course, being a big proponent for my art and everything, and still is even to this day, really pushes me to to do so, and I have the fortunality of having families, including my wife, my boys, and my father, my mom, my mother, and many of my other family and friends to really see that this is a great platform to utilize that on. As far as why did I get into doing comics, I was inspired actually by Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. I'm a big Batman fan, and was looking at different other platforms like, stories such as The Killing Joke and Watchmen and History of Violence and Road to Perdition and other stories that really talked about experiences and dynamics, but not always necessarily touching on the traditional superhero lore, and use that platform as a way of kind of expression. Over the years, I've found out that I wanted to just move away from just being an artist to actually like using my ability to actually like write the stories, develop them further and everything, which ultimately led me into the ventures that I'm doing and looking to do further on and everything down the line. Now, which brings us to March. March is actually a trilogy. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of it, but March is a trilogy of books that John Lewis actually was inspired by his life, his memoirs, and everything. And I noticed that as another way and platform of like seeing how not a lot of people know this, but he was a big comic book fan. So what was funny is that when he was actually looking to do his memoirs, he was actually approached by an artist and everything to kind of say like, hey, have you thought about using graphic novels as a way, since you're a fan, you come into the Comic Cons, things of that nature? Have you thought about maybe, using a graphic novel platform to kind of tell your story? Now, obviously, I wasn't involved in the conversation. Otherwise, it'd be a whole nother level of conversation we have. But as rumor has it, he was immediately taken by the idea. And from my understanding, also in my research in it, it took a minute to actually put together. It wasn't the fastest process in the world and everything, but translating life experience, especially one of so much layering, and for lack of a better term, it's hard to put that in just a few pages per se. You have to go into detail, and you have to detail it in a manner that's going to captivate and capture people ongoing. I think when you look at comics today, obviously they're a lot more. They're not your granddad's comics. It's not those proverbial. Even the superhero comics are a lot more detailed and have their social topics and can be much more engrossing than just the proverbial superhero comes in and beat the villain. They use this platform as a way of like almost telling a movie prior to the movie's creation. And when you look at platforms like this can actually be one of the more aggressive, non-aggressive manners, or maybe passive-aggressive if you actually look at it, manners of delivering a story, because you're not really aware of what you're actually capturing, what's being delivered to you, because you're looking at it from the guise of the venue of a comic. And that was one of the things that's really pushed me to see like how that was delivered. I missed his appearance at that Comic-Con like by a year, which is kind of funny. So he was in San Diego Comic-Con when the first March novel came out, and graphic novel came out, and I missed that by a year, which is kind of very irritating. But needless to say, though, it's always inspired me is seeing that story captured in that medium and pushed forward the way it has been. Seeing how it's been an inspiration for other creators to do other layered topics on this platform has been, for me, one of those type of things, especially as a creator of color, to keep me pushing, keep me, motivated. Not motivated. I don't like really motivation. I like inspiration. Keeps me moving in the manner that aggressively and staying hungry as aggressively as I am today. So that's me in a nutshell.
Natalie, did you want to start your questions, your slew of questions? Hold on, let me unmute you.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. So you had mentioned the impact of specific comics and graphic novels. You'd mentioned Miller's Batman, Watchmen, and a few others. Can you touch on an early experience that you had, perhaps a specific moment where you understood the impact and power of the combination of words and images, specifically as it relates to this format?
Yeah, it was all kind of like it was all amalgamated, the experience really, because for the longest being fine art, having my fine arts background, I only saw I was really only looking at telling stories through these big grandiose visuals and these canvases and what have you and everything, even at a young age. I love the Michelangelo's Last Supper, or works by Leonardo. Some of the that level, or Renoir's and Monet's pieces that really captivated you and drew you in. But the thing that actually that got me over to, and I was at Interlochen when I first saw, it was a very, 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 I don't know if I said it enough, very tattered copy of The Dark Knight Returns. And it got in my hands by, we were just passing through, they were just passing it. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, 1988. So they were just passing the book around and everything, and everybody was talking about this new, this new story of Batman per se and everything from the future. And so when I read it and everything, I found myself not just reading a comic or a graphic novel necessarily. I found myself caught up in the depth of the story. So it wasn't just a piece on a superhero; it was really a psychological study. And that was my epiphany in terms of, like, this is what I want to do. Ultimately, this is what I want to do, is like tell stories on this platform that really made people stop and think, as opposed to, obviously this is just a great Batman story. This really actually kind of changed the dynamics of how stories can be told in this medium, even with superheroes. You can actually send a message that was stronger than just, the two-dimensional, save the day scenario. So and made me realize that it's just like you can do more with a pen and canvas, or brush and canvas and everything, and evolve this so that people can look at this and delve deeper into it. There are a lot of people that look at these, various arrays of comic books in this format, and say that, like, if it wasn't for this character, I was in a very dark time, or this was my inspiration, this is my hope. These characters are today's doctrine of not just mythology, but as lessons learned, and they're moral lessons, moral stories, moral yachts that I don't think a lot of people take into account. Just, well, more so now than ever before, the gravity that they present to the reader. And so that, for me, is something that I really wanted to emulate and do justice to the genre in that capacity, by making sure that me as a creator contributed on that same level. And I felt that, again, as a Black artist in this country and creator of color in this country, to have this platform to deliver messages and images that not only inspire good storytelling, but inspire individuals that look at these and say, like, okay, I'm seeing something that looks like myself, or individuals or readers that it doesn't necessarily have to look like them, but they're captivated by a strong story and the meaning behind it and everything. Because for me, we all fall into the spectrum of diversity and inclusion. And I think that one of the best ways, the arts are one of these major avenues and caveats that are used, and that I feel is underappreciated, quite honestly, that you can have so much of an array of different people, backgrounds, classes, what have you, and everything, and like are just captivated by the merit of the art. And you can open conversations, you can open doors and other avenues to really get people to say, like, I didn't see it that way, or I didn't see this in that capacity. But for me, that's what that was, that aha moment, that moment at Interlochen at that time in 1988, the 16-year-old looking at it in that way.
And you mentioned a little bit about your own work within the industry. What has your experience as an African-American man, as a creator, as a reader, what has that been like within the comics industry?
Well, needless to say, there have been disparaging moments, especially when you look at how often now there's been encouragement over the years, of course. I think that has gone, that also goes without saying. But earlier on, there were very limited, few to none in terms of translations of characters that were not necessarily emulating stereotypes and everything. I mean, like, I had the pleasure of meeting Stan Lee a couple times back in 2015 and 2011, and really having the opportunity to kind of just like, get some different insights. And he was saying, and there was a point in time where the question was asked, like, what was it like to be part of the creation of characters that were like, let's say Black Panther, for example, or Luke Cage, or Brother Voodoo, or so on and so forth. You look at these characters, and it was, you look at the fact that, like, you have these these Black characters being created by the white creators, and they had their interpretation of their interpretation of the Black experience. And it was interesting, and he acknowledged the fact that, like, he can only go off only so much. And that was one of the more insightful things, which is why, like, I had such a level of respect for Stan to even reference at that point. And he's just like, I can only interpret so much. I can only use, like, go off of so much, because there weren't a lot of Black creators, if any. There was only a point in time where I'm friends with Arvell Jones, who was one of the first Black artists to work for Marvel and DC, and that was back in 1976. And him and I know each other by chance. We cross each other's paths, and we actually are collaborating right now on some things. And Arvell mentioned the fact that, like, meeting Stan Lee, meeting Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and other people and everything over the years, that he was maybe one of maybe two other Black artists between Marvel and DC at that time. And so the interpretations, and they weren't necessarily always doing like the projects or characters that featured Black characters. They were actually, doing fill-ins and things of that nature. So there was a period of time where interpretation and translation was more pulled from stereotype. So it was a little disconcerting. Now, fast forward, a few decades, you see that practice is still very much present, unless you are taking upon yourself your individual reins to actually, be the person that actually guides the ship when it comes down to, presentation of characters that look like you, and maybe and are not, and veer away from the cliche dialogue and the stereotypical dialogue. One of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that in my properties, they'll be showcasing not just Black characters, but of course Eurocentric characters, Asian characters, Middle Eastern, Latino, all the spectrum, because, like, we have to be, if we talk about inclusion, we cannot invoke a level of exclusion. So that means everyone has to have some level of translation in these properties, which is being encouraged more. But obviously we're playing catch up, even in the comic industry, that you're seeing more characters being emulated on the panels in terms of translation, but there's still a very small amount of creators in the background. There are not a lot of creators of color in the background working for the Marvels or the DCs or the the big two really are Marvel and DC. You see more independents actually doing this, but obviously the platforms are not as large as, let's say, your Marvel, DC, or Image, or Valiant, or what have you. And there's still a lot of area of opportunity there. So for me, I believe in creating my own. After a while, I was like, I'd rather be able to eventually write the checks as opposed to just receive them.
So obviously we're here today to speak specifically about March.
Yes.
And it's, of course, a very powerful graphic novel that incorporates memoir, and you have the fantastic visuals in terms of the drawings. What I would ask you is, how do you feel March is similar to other graphic novels and comic books that you've encountered, but also how does it diverge from those, specifically in terms of the storytelling aspect and what John Lewis is trying to do with it?
That's really a good question. Really good question. The similarities, of course, are the traditional, the traditional go-tos, the visual, the word captions, the story, the word bubbles per se, or the caption boxes, the way the different cinematography, because I don't think a lot of people take into account the cinematography approach that's used to creating different angles and storytelling in terms, you can tell a picture's worth 1,000 words. Very true. So it stays true to the format when it comes down to how the delivery of the visual per se. And I think that's one thing that that's how it really stays true to the genre, the integrity of the genre. Obviously, there's so many different ways you can actually incorporate or translate stories through comic book format, just like there's different ways you can translate a film. And I think that's another way that character creators of today look and approach the comic genre. They approach them as film, and they approach them as cinematography and cinematics from that vantage point and everything. And so the literary aspects, of course, again coming from the memoirs of Mr. Lewis, the reality is that you wanted to, the story, the visuals had to capture the gravitas of what was being put into written word. You couldn't undersell the content, and they went with a certain style. It was a loose style. You're not going to be able to, like, there are certain comic book artists that have to just stick with doing comic, superhero genre art. Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, maybe Todd McFarlane, individuals that don't necessarily, you can't necessarily see that translate. So when you look at the art in March, or you look at somebody like Frank Miller that has this loose way of storytelling and everything in terms of drawing real people, real content, things of that nature, you see a level of grounded reality in these pictures, in these images. And you can almost take them off and see the photographs that were actually used and everything in correlation to the stories or the visuals that are depicted. And I think that is something that obviously differentiates from a story like this, because of what is being projected, and how it's being projected, because you have to do justice to the word. You can't just, draw and create a visual that does not really emulate. You're not gonna be drawn to March if you saw the translation of John Lewis flying in the sky with a cape in a suit, his tie and everything, but he's got a cape on and flying and what have you, and he's all muscled out and everything. You're not going to really look at that and go like, hey, that's John Lewis. But it's like, one of these things you got to have some reality, some grounding. So, and knowing that he was first hands-on in terms of like how this is going to be, and you look at the attacks, and you look at images of like the water hoses, and you look at images of you know, the counter sit downs, and you know how they were attacked and had what have you and everything, and him as a little boy at one point in time, and then fast forwarding to, you know, the inauguration of President Obama and what have you. All these different things and everything had to have a grounding that I felt were very much that did justice to that did a lot of justice, honestly, towards the story that was being conveyed.
And I know that Representative Lewis was himself a fan of comic books. And obviously he had many options for telling his story. He talked about it a little bit in interviews, but I would ask, from what you know, why do you think he really focused on this medium as a storytelling method?
Well, you have to take into account that you know, one of his big things was sticking true to the nonviolent approach to protest, which I believe speaks volumes, especially in a very volatile time. It probably resonates even more so again than within recent years, and it speaks a lot. And I think part of that, when you think about the technical approach with the graphic novel, there's a platform which is a very nonviolent platform that is used to honestly speak and resonate a large statement. For everyone that read the book, when you first look at it and everything, you see and you're reading it and everything, you understand why this is, you know, required reading in some institutions, and it should be all, because the delivery of that is in such a manner that it draws the people in, and he knew that that would draw more people in to reading more about what was going on at that time, what had happened at that time, and what predicates today, the residuals of that time that still predicate today, and using that vehicle of delivery in such a manner that it had people like captured because of the visuals and what have you and everything. And it's to a degree, as I mentioned before, it's a very aggressive. It's an aggressive approach because of how powerful graphic novels have become today in a non-aggressive manner. You know, they kind of fit. It's a dichotomy in existence, so to speak. It's aggressive, but it's not aggressive in its approach and its intent to deliver such a powerful message and have you thinking. Once you're done reading the graphic novel, you're really looking at this and saying, you know, like, wow, did I just learn something, or you know, and whatnot. You're walking away from this. It's just like, hey, yeah, I really did. I didn't waste any time in reading this, because I was so drawn and into of the story, but the pictures also have you interested in like what happens next. And so if you're not careful, it's a very fast read, despite how much the content is. It's a very fast read when you get going, because it captivates you with the visual and with the story. And so that level of technique and storytelling that's one of the reasons why that technique is it resonates so well with people, because if you deliver the story right, and if you tell the story right, you know, people are just itching and waiting for the next contribution, the next issue. They're waiting for it. They're ready to jump into it and everything, because they finished it so quick. And then they're saying, oh, when is volume 2 coming out and everything. So again, it is a trilogy, people. So, you know, like, you know, there are other 2 volumes out. So, you know, check it out.
So you referred to graphic novels as a vehicle of delivery for storytelling. Do you think that this particular story would be as effective or meaningful in a more traditional memoir format?
I believe that, I'm going to sound really biased. No. Unless you're a reader, you know, like unless you're a big reader. And mind you, I have a couple books here. I have one of my favorite books. It's called The Confession of Nat Turner, and that book is like it's like a Harry Potter book. And so a lot of although I think Harry Potter still has it beat by a couple hundred pages, but still it's a really thick book. And although I really love a good read, and I love the idea of where your imagination can take you and everything, I feel graphic novels and this platform are great nowadays, especially for children and young adults who might have the attention span of a gnat. So, like if you're trying to, for those that really need something, especially in a Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, world and everything, I think that this is actually a really good way of stimulating conversation, stimulating thought and insight on topics that traditionally would kind of like quote unquote bore children of today, which it shouldn't because the message is so powerful. But let's be for real. We have we have a very immediate gratification society, and I think that in order to deliver stories like this, you also have to understand that if you want to get this as much as broad as you want the story, the message to go, it's important to use vehicles and methods that will broadcast as fast as possible. And although you would get a large number of people in your traditional memoir doctrine, if it was using that original or traditional format, I think John Lewis saw the fact that this is going to resonate with a lot of young people because you want to get them young. You want to get the youth looking at this. You want to get the youth fascinated by this and enthralled with this from every walk of life. And I tell you, comic books today are something that's used in such a manner that it's no longer, again, something that the dirty little secret that you say, like, oh, I collect comic books or whatever. This is one of these type of things now where it's just like, yeah, I'm a straight up comic book collector. And because I like the content, I like the graphic novels. As I mentioned, Road to Perdition, a lot of people don't really know about this, the Tom Hanks movie from back in early 90s or what have you, or something like that. I think it was like early 90s or mid to early 90s. That particular book was a graphic novel. A lot of people don't really think about that in terms of, oh, that was a comic book movie? Yes, it was a comic book movie. History of Violence with Viggo Mortensen, which actually was a really good movie. That was a comic book that a lot of people don't really think about. Is like, oh, wow. I know I mentioned it earlier, but those are actually two more grounded graphic novels that I've looked at and everything I've read prior to the movie translation. So, nowadays, this is just one of those type of things that I think, if you want to be kind of a expansive thinker and you want this opportunity to get to as many people as possible, I think that graphic novels, the non-traditional approach, is one of the best ways of approach.
Nice. So in terms of your personal reading experience of March Book One, do you think you'd be able to talk about a couple of the panels, like things that really stood out to you in terms of the design elements that were really effective in telling a particular part of that story, the layout of the page, how it flows? Is that something you will do?
Yes, most definitely. There was, I don't have a copy of the book right in front of me, actually. There was a scene, I think, if you be so kind, I think there was an opening scene. If you could open that for me real quick. Okay, go. You got it. So, could you just throw that up in front of the camera? Do you have the book? Do you?
I think Frances is trying to throw it up. I don't know if it's coming up, but.
Oh, is she? Oh, okay. So yeah, if you could put that up to the camera a little bit more, Francis. Okay, there you go. So that first scene for me, the top panel. Yep, that's it. All right. So I've always loved perspective angles and everything in storytelling. I love depth. And I think like the opening scene to everything is one of those type of things that really bring out, the depth of a situation. Like I'm glad they stuck with more of the black and white. I think I'm a big noir person. So, but the depth of that opening panel at the Pettus Bridge was just one of those type of things when you just open it up and you're seeing it's just like, okay, wow, okay, this is the March on Selma. This is Selma right here, and it just it cascades. I think that right there, the establishing panel, resonates volumes. I know this is, I think one of the biggest things, especially when you're doing, yep, perfect. I think that's so important because it's not like, I mean, just to be real about it and everything, because I'm a big critique when it comes down to art and storytelling. Oh, thank you, ladies. I'm not that, it's not, let's say, the best illustrations in the world or what have you and everything. This isn't necessarily like, like a, like this, the Mona Lisa or anything, but it's one of those type of, it is a visual that really pulls you in terms of, okay, where are they, where they are, what's going on, you're really sitting back and going just like, oh wow, this is starting off, like right in that placement. That was for me, that was like the biggest, it wasn't so much the story, the panels throughout and everything in terms of like his life as a boy or sitting at the counters or the attacks and what have you and everything. It was like that one establishing shot from the very beginning. It grounds everything. It sets in motion what is about to happen. I love quiet panels, which is kind of ironic because I hate drawing them. It's like, so quiet panels are where you establish the story. Quiet panels are like when you look and you can tell like where they are, what's going on. I'm a big action junkie, so I love drawing the action scenes. But for me though, I love like when you're seeing the grounding, like where is the story taking place? Where is the meat of the story taking place? I love Scorsese's way or Antoine Fuqua's storytelling approach when it comes down, and I think about those directors when I'm drawing my own stuff and when I'm telling my own stories and everything. But I try to veer away from Michael Bay's approach to storytelling and everything. Otherwise, it's just be a whole panels of, splash scenes, which are big fight scenes and everything with maybe 2 sentences of story. Stop in the end. So it's like, so I think you can say a lot with just that panel level right there, just the opening of it that draws you
In your opinion, what does this particular medium add to our cultural understanding of the civil rights movement, of protest, of racial justice?
Ooh. Wow. Okay. This level of storytelling or this particular
The medium
property?
itself, yes.
The medium?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have to understand that the medium gives us an opportunity to present us, and when I say us, I'm talking about the Black experience in this country. I'm talking about any experience, quite honestly, but particularly in this particular case, the Black experience in this country. It gives an opportunity to not so much be censored the way it used to be. There was a point in time where everything had to be approved by the Comic Book Association of America, and which took away a lot of content opportunity, which took away the ability to tell certain stories, and certain things had to be watered down. Nowadays, that I don't even think that exists anymore, thank goodness. And one of the things that is great is that this gives an opportunity to tell an unfiltered and uncensored an unwatered down approach to depicting and talking about what was going on years ago. There's a friend of mine right now that's in the process of doing a project that talked about the police brutality in this country, and you know, and it's kind of like an anthology of situations happening that detail injustices within the Black community and injustices throughout. And we had this discussion, and where he said, he's asked me a couple times, it's just like, you know, like, you know, is this going to make people feel uncomfortable? I feel it has to be talked and has to be talked about. Is this going to make people uncomfortable? And this medium allows us to spark again, and going back to what I said earlier, spark again, having the discussions that need to be had that are uncomfortable. But this is the reality, and I'm glad that we have so many people on the line right now. We you know, it's actually very crowded and unexpected, so thank you. This one of the things that I think is so important is that we have these discussions. This property, or this medium of delivery, this method of delivery, really makes people have the discussions, or at least inspire, or at least have the epiphany and the need to have the discussions that need to be had, that are uncomfortable. They can be uncomfortable, but they're supposed to be uncomfortable. And we got to get to a point to where, like, as John Lewis said, you know, you have to have good trouble getting in good trouble. There's a thing that's good uncomfortability, good uncomfort, good discomfort. And, you know, sometimes you have to talk about the elephant in the room to address the fact that there's an elephant in the room. And this medium allows for it allows for these messages and these stories to kind of eke their way in terms of, in rooms of discussion and conversation, and it forces people to discuss what they saw, not just from the written word or what they could have imagined, but to have the visual in front of them, even if it is an illustration, but the illustration has coming from a reference. Some of these are coming from, you know, direct references that were of things and incidences and injustices that happened because of what was going on in this country at that time. And we have to carry on these conversations. Thus, we'll be, you know, we'll you know, lay folly to doing them again, and have that history repeat itself, as, you know, unfortunately we have seen.
So in many ways, the March trilogy is about the power of words. It showcases nonviolent protest, the oratory of civil rights giants like Dr. King. And yet, of course, as we've discussed already, the medium would not exist without the powerful images attached to that. Could you point out maybe another particular panel or page within the story that really stood out to you, of where those two modes of expression work exceptionally well together, where it's very effective?
There is, let me see again, would you mind going, it's actually right near the middle of the book. Is that Francis is doing that?
That is Francis holding it up.
Okay, all right. So further in the middle of the book, okay, keep going. Yeah. Okay, you pull that up. Is that the, I'm trying to pull your panel up. Let me see. Like, hold on one second. I think that's the, how do I get her?
Let me see. I think I have to talk, so I'll be big. Which do you remember what section?
Right after it was kind of like the March on Washington.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. I think pull it up just right there. Nope.
With Dr. King.
That's it. Right there. Okay. That last panel right there with Dr. King.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So again, I'm a big person when it comes to grounding. And one of the things that, like, when you're talking about, yeah, that's perfect. So one of the things for me, when you're talking about grounding and everything, kind of establishing, there's not a lot of drama, not a lot of, discussion, so on and so forth, not a lot of depth when it comes down to, big angles or anything of that nature. It really, it kind of brought in, these elements of, Dr. King and John Lewis, and, like, and like the exchange between them that was at that particular point in time. You could tell that there was more to. By the time this is done, you see that there's more to their relationship than just individuals that were part of the movement and everything. There was a sense of mentor and mentee. There was a sense of, like, oh, that's fine, thank you. Oh, you can drop it.
Okay.
Thank you. So there was a sense.
They held the Congress, and
I'm sorry?
which they had.
Oops.
Okay, so there was a sense of relationship that was beyond just mentor and mentee. There was a sense of there was more to their relationship in that. And so, like, that, I feel like, and even though that they talk about that throughout the book, and it's referenced throughout the book, there was a sense of expression, even though it's slight as, of angst or what's the best way to, not so much angst, but more so the severity of what was going on at that time. That's it. Severity of what was happening at that time, that was very important to discuss and understand better. You got a better understanding. People who who would read into that and everything, understood that there was more than just a conversation of sorts between them that just talked about, let's organize this, let's organize that. And you can see that within the content of this, that he looked at this as Dr. King and many of the other individuals that helped with the organization of the march in the first place, more than just like colleagues and what have you. By the time you were done with this property, you realize that, what you just literally saw was like really a piece of history and something that was more in depth. You got more of an intel in terms of what was actually going on at that time. That was, that was more than just general conversation. That was more than just general rough history that you would hear from a reporter or news reporter and everything. You heard it from the horse's mouth. And so that was something that I really enjoyed when looking at these, again, quiet time moments, these quiet time panels and everything, that really resonated in terms of what was actually going on. By the time you were done with it, you had firsthand conversation of what was going on.
So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I just want to ask, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share about March Book One and John Lewis's legacy?
Oh, wow. March Book One, obviously great read for, I would say, one, to everyone that's on the that's in the discussion, and for those that you might know, that you can pass this along. There's a reason why it's required reading, and part of that is that it's really history from the source. It comes right through. When you really stop and think about it, when you meet someone like that, which I never had the pleasure of meeting him, that's why I was kind of mad I missed him at the Comic-Con. But when you have an opportunity to meet somebody like that, somebody who's marched with Dr. King, who knew Medgar Evers, who or lived in that time of Medgar Evers, and lived in that time of Malcolm and what have you and everything, all those times, literally he lived in those years. They were crossed shoulders with them or came across them in passing, and you don't really think about the level of history that just brushed past you or that you're seeing in front of you and everything. So it's humbling to a degree that, like, wow, this was someone that lived through that, and this is their content. So when you get the opportunity to have something in your hand that was delivered directly from them, I highly recommend that this is something you don't just read and then say, like, okay, that was a good read. You got to pass that along. And so, just like any piece of literature, I would highly recommend using this as a method of enlightening your children, your grandchildren, and your friends and your colleagues and other family members and everything, in terms of, this is not just Black history, or this is history. This is American history that that is giving you an opportunity to read it and be delivered to you in a manner that is a little bit more digestible than, let's say, 1,000-word memoir. What was the other part of that question?
Let's see. Speaking specifically about your final thoughts on the book and then Lewis's legacy.
I think that with you know, John Lewis, you know, is man, you can't, for one person to really say like what this man, you know, when he passed away, you got to stop and think about like his passing was like the passing of like, you know, history itself. Like, you know, you could touch, you know, what was going on at that time. This is someone who went through an insurmountable amount of violence and everything, and was still ready to, even after, you know, getting into Congress and everything, got arrested another, you know, 40 some odd times and everything. And is, you know, that's ridiculous. But again, you know, that's his commitment to the movement and to equality and inclusion and everything, because, you know, he didn't mind having disorderly conduct. He didn't mind disrupting the public, because sometimes you have to be aggressive in your nonviolence in order to get people to really listen. I think sometimes people assume and misunderstand that in order to, you know, be nonviolent, you have to be passive. And John Lewis made it clear that like, this isn't about being, I'm not being passive. For me to be nonviolent doesn't mean I gotta be passive. That means I can use every other method in the world without, you know, going, you know, without the equal level of violence that you're putting on me. I can use all these other methods to, you know, make my voice louder. And right now you have to be loud. You have to be outspoken. You have to be, you know, like you have to be unafraid, and especially in fearful times. I'll be honest with you. Being a Black man in this country, it is just unnerving. You know, there are times where I already know I'm going to be, you know, labeled or ostracized or disenfranchised and what have you and everything, or because of, you know, me walking in and looking the way I look and what have you and everything, without them taking a chance to like taking a moment to hear what I have to say or how I speak or whatever. They're not concerned about my credentials or my background or pedigree or where I live or whatever and everything. I'm just, you know, that Black dude who just walked in. And these are things that like I don't have a problem talking about. I remember I used to be hesitant to have these discussions, because I was like, well, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Despite the fact I've been, you know, depending on where I am, I'm uncomfortable most of the time. And it's no one's, you know, and this is just a product of the society we live in. Now the question is, are we willing to change the society that we live in? Are we willing to change, or are we going to just, you know, stew in the quagmire that exists, that can exist if we allow it to? That was part of that right there. And that, mind you, that was just one part of the legacy of John Lewis. That right there is just one segment of, you know, this man's life. And I would be doing it a disservice if I was to say like culminate it all in just like a couple sentences, because we can't. Even those books can't really do justice to it and everything, but at least it came from him, so at least to some degree, and he signed off on it, so at least to some degree he was okay with the translation. So my hope is that I continue to do justice as the opportunities present themselves for me, that I do justice on this platform, this media, and delivering messages and content in a manner that would be, that he would look at and say like, hey, I like this story, let me see what it is and everything. So like that's part of the legacy, to inspire individuals like myself and you and everyone else and everything, no matter your color or creed, to understand that you can be a change factor, you can be a catalyst for a transition, positive transition.
Wow. Thank
That
you.
was incredibly powerful. So I just really want to say a big thank you, Abdul, for being here this evening and speaking with the book club members. We really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable. and sharing your thoughts on the graphic novel itself, as well as your experiences as an African-American creator.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop recording now.